Welcome to the Leading Ladies podcast with international leadership coach, speaker, author, trainer, and your host, Fiona Mackay. The Leading Ladies podcast shares stories and advice from women around the world who have successfully navigated the glass ceiling. You'll gain powerful insights into strategies for cracking the glass ceiling, embracing your self-worth and value, and advocating for yourself and others. So please join Fiona for frank, courageous, and heartfelt conversations designed to take you on a journey to new levels of personal and professional success.
Welcome back, Leading Ladies. We have a real treat in store for you today. Our next guest is somebody that I have wanted on this podcast since the very beginning, and we've even talked about her in some of our previous podcasts. So I feel like I'm in the presence of aerospace royalty. Today, big reveal, we have Erika Armstrong joining us. Many of our listeners will know Erika as she is the author of A Chick in the Cockpit and has a huge following on LinkedIn. Erika has spent 30 years in aviation, from the front desk of a small fixed base operator in Minnesota to the captain's seat of an international commercial airliner. Erika has been a Red Cross, charter, corporate, cargo, hazmat, and air ambulance pilot. And she actually flew 28 different aircraft before going to the airlines. She's also an aviation professor at MSU Denver and is VP of Business Development at Advanced Aircrew Academy. We're really, really excited to have Erika here today. And as you know from my last podcast, we are switching now to have a co-host with me, who is Matt Heger, founder of Pineapple Empire and creator of the very first list of top women in aviation and aerospace to follow on LinkedIn. Welcome, Erika and Matt.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona.
I'm really, really excited to have you both here.
Your accent makes everything sound better too.
It does. It does. Hey, in England, my accent's actually not very desirable, and so I just love it in America, where everyone's like, "Oh, I love your accent." I'm like, "Yay!"
And all of us Minnesotans would appreciate listening to that with an English accent, because Minnesotans have an accent too, and we always get teased about it.
Yeah,
you make it sound so good.
Oh, thank you, thank you. So Erika is here today to talk about breaking barriers by changing perspectives. And so I think that just fits fantastically with the first question that I always ask in my podcast. What do you think of the glass ceiling? Does it still exist?
The good old glass ceiling. We've been cleaning up that glass for many, many years, right? So does it exist? I think now it's a screen door. I think there's still a little bit of resistance there, but there are ways through. And we're all here to help you push through that. Screen doors are much more easier to open than glass doors. So, I think there's still a little bit of resistance there, but we've made such great strides over the last few years. And the momentum, and just even having a podcast like this where we talk about it, changes that resistance on that door. So, yeah, there's a little bit there, but my goal is to show women how to get through that door easily, and just begins by talking about it like we're doing right now today.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really notice about your following is just how many men follow you too, and I think that's really, really powerful in changing perceptions. I mean, how have men responded since you published A Chick in the Cockpit?
Surprisingly well. Some of it's a little bit tongue in cheek, just kind of addressing the elephant in the room, applying some humor on it so that we can have a level playing field where we can all discuss it. Because at the end of the day, most pilots, men or women, don't care, if you're a man or a woman. The airplane certainly doesn't care. So we have to get over ourselves, right? Yeah. Half of the idea of breaking these stereotypes is getting over our own what we think of it, and we stereotype ourselves. We kind of get ourselves in a rut. Of all the people that I flew with, all the men that I flew with, 85% of them are perfect gentlemen. They don't really care that there's a woman in the cockpit with them. But having said that, it still takes some time for men to get used to that idea. I mean, I've flown with many men who had never flown with a woman for the first time. And, just there's a few moments where they're not quite sure how they're supposed to behave or what they're supposed to do. And I've tried to set the tone to make sure that they knew, hey, we're doing our jobs. We love our jobs. Drop the facade, just be yourself. That's the bottom line.
I laugh here because I grew up in manufacturing, and there's been so many times when men have used swear words and they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Fiona," and I'm like, "If only you knew what I was like behind closed doors." I do have some salty language sometimes. Try and stay away from it on this podcast, but not always perfect. But yeah, it's very, very funny. And I think I love what you say about, our own glass ceilings. I think one of the things that was my glass ceiling is really focusing on, why am I the only one? Why am I the only one? And I know that it really does help to increase the momentum when you're not the only one. But what really helped me was when I shifted that mindset from, I'm the only one, but hell yeah, I'm going to make sure there's more women in this room really soon. That's my job.
Absolutely. I knew that I had broken through that glass ceiling when I was sitting in a room full of men. Just not that long ago, I was at a safety conference. We had these breakout sessions. So it was about 500 people attending. There was probably maybe 30 women in the room. And then we broke out into these sessions and there was about 200 people in there. And I've got my notebook out. I'm ready to listen. And then somebody leaned over to me and said, "Hey, do you realize you're the only woman in the room?" And I looked around and I'm like, "Oh, well, I don't care. I didn't even notice." So yeah, you do operate at that level and you get to that point. So it's not a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And Matt, curious, you're a guy. What's it like for you seeing all these wonderful women on your LinkedIn feed?
That's true. And also it's amazing and awesome. All of you all are super cool. And I mean, I made a point of building my network to follow a bunch of awesome, cool people. And that's what I have now. So to see a bunch of women dominate the feed when, maybe a few years ago, it was a bunch of guys, especially on LinkedIn, which the demographic was tilted more that way of active users. It's nice to see the switch up and change. It's a lot more positive and open and transparent and authentic. So a lot of new lessons and perspectives to be learned there, and kind of take back to my domain.
I love it. And how did it feel to have women like Erika ranking right at the top of your list for the top 62?
Well, it was pretty crazy. Just to be, first of all, it's an honor, blessing and a privilege to be on this podcast with the both of you. And especially Erika, since she is such a rock star. I'd always hoped one day that I'd be, running in these circles, and it's kind of crazy to see it manifesting. And it's happening faster and faster. So it was just really cool because I kind of had a hunch that we'd be running into closer contact at some point after that. And like I said, it's just a blessing and a privilege to be on here to learn and gain from each of your experience. Almost like I'm being mentored and coached. I keep going back to it as my favorite word. It's just awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, I overuse the word awesome. And when I go back to England, everyone's like, "You're so American."
We're trying to prove that not only the Kardashians can get followers, but aviation nerds can too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. So Erika, your topic today, breaking barriers by changing perceptions. Tell me a little bit more about that and why you chose this topic.
We could spend 8 hours on it. I kind of follow this pattern and the observation of this pattern because I also teach. And so I'm still discouraged that, out of 50 students that I have in my classroom, there's still only 3 or 4 women, right? So I'm always observing what is it about aviation that either attracts or, encourages women not to enter. So what's that perception that makes women think that they can't be in it? Because we're at the point now where if you want to be a pilot and you're a woman, you certainly can. I think the irony of the situation is that aviation is hard for both men and women to get into. It's equally challenging. But what I found is that it becomes actually harder for women as we progress in our careers. We get up to the captain seat, but then what else is happening in the same time? Then we're also starting families, getting married, all those other life experiences that happen. And aviation is completely unforgiving. So the reality is, it's not any harder in the beginning, but it becomes progressively harder for women. And the burden actually falls on the rest of the family. If you decide to get married and you decide to have kids, it's things that are out of your control, because you need a really strong spouse to be that person that stay at home with the kids, and having that conversation before you start a relationship and get married is not in your mindset, when you're getting married. So just having that conversation while students are young and getting started in the career path, and just having a conversation about it. So, and just changing the idea that aviation is too hard. It's a circular story, because we're always talking about how can we help women through these challenges? And, well, it's the same for men and women learning how to fly. The airplane doesn't care, like we were saying. So it's all those additional resources that we need to do, and we're getting there. It's getting better. Just having an ability to reach out to other women in a group to ask questions and have conversations, real conversations, not superficial, saying, if you want to be a woman, you can do it, but actually saying, okay, here's what you're going to probably experience. You're not the only one. Yeah, it's really hard to leave your newborn baby at home and be gone for 4 or 5 days. So, besides being hard, there's not much you can do about it. But what can you do is make sure you have a network and a support group to ask those questions, to make it feel like you're not the only person. And just having that will help strengthen your ability to do your job.
Yeah, I find it really interesting what you're saying there, because one of the things I observe is that women are advancing in the workplace, but some of the societal things are actually behind. I remember when I got my job in America, the guy that was my boyfriend at the time, in England, his friends were like actually turned to him and said, well, are you okay with him moving to America? And I'm like, it's not his choice, and he can come with me if he wants to. And I was just like so offended, because for me, I never really seen the difference, male, female. I don't care that I'm a woman, I can do anything. And so I was really, really surprised to see that. And I'm really lucky. I've got a husband who's very, very supportive. But I think some of those home stereotypes do definitely need to be challenged. And even with my parents, there's still roles that men and women play, and I guess I totally defy that. My husband does all the cooking. He's a great cook. So Matt, curious, how would women actually go and broach these kind of conversations with men? Hey, I want to be a pilot, or I want to go be a vice president, and I'm going to be flying around the world, and I'm not going to be here too often. Do you mind being more of the stability? How do we go have those conversations?
That's a good question. And I think, the knee-jerk reaction in my head is I'm kind of going through the same thing where I'm at in my career, where I'm getting comfortable asking for things. Or I guess it comes down to that, the Silicon Valley, I always forget her name, which is bad, but it's the lean in principle. Cheryl, yeah. I was thinking that was it, but I just did not want to say it incorrectly. So leaning in, taking up more space, and then kind of like embracing it. In Spartan, we call it embracing the suck. Spartan races, the obstacle racing. So the crazy thing that I do every couple of months for some reason. Yeah. One of our mottos is just embrace the suck. So leaning in. And so that uncomfortableness is just something you got to lean into, which for me, I'm struggling with it now as well, and asking for either promotions or the raises, or pushing back on different initiatives at work or campaigns or ideas that I don't think are good. Or if I have input, sometimes I'm a conflict avoidant type of person. So I will tend to not, I will, keep silent or think that my voice won't have an impact in that. And I'm just getting comfortable asking and pushing it out there. And I think every time I've been either on the receiving end or pushed it myself, it's always led to a good conversation. Like, I think it's kind of like, it was brought up earlier, is the elephant in the room. And when it gets brought up, there's kind of a sense of relief when it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that leaning in, because it's so important, because we read that book, it's a bestseller, right? But so think of the reality of what leaning in looks like. You're completely off balance. There's no way around it, especially with aviation. To be away from home for 5 days, you're going to be on a constant teeter-totter back and forth of your happiness level. And it changes over time. And to know that it's going to be that way, and there's nothing you can do about it. Having that acceptance that that burden on you, especially as a mom, if you decide to have kids, it's going to feel horrible at times. You're going to be looking at your career saying, wait, do I really want to be doing this right now? And you're going to make decisions based on that moment. But you have to learn to step back and look at the big scope of your life and how different from month to month you are, what your happiness levels are, what your obligations are to your work and to your home. It's going to change constantly. So a lot of people will get into that rut and think, okay, I'm happy right now, and if I continue doing that, I'll stay happy. Well, that's not how it happens. And then we wonder, what's wrong? Well, life is happening to you. So you have to learn to just roll with it. It's going to adjust up and down on that teeter-totter. And most people don't step back and look at the big picture and have that viewpoint of it. It's hard to do, because you kind of have to look back at yourself and look at what you've done and say, okay, well, that made me happy. What at that time made me happy, but it's changed now. And then make a decision based on that.
Yeah, with my clients, I often talk to them about, they've got the little G and the big G. So little G is like, what's the little goal that's right in front of you? And it might just be getting through today. And it might not be going well, but what's the big G? What's the big goal? What's this in service of? And so, if you keep yourself present to your big goal, you can be like, hey, I might be struggling today, but it doesn't mean that I'm not on track to hit that big G. It's just a bump on the way to a milestone. I'd like to take a moment to pause and recognize GM Defense, our sponsor that helps make this podcast possible. GM Defense is driving the future of military mobility by leveraging the best-in-class capabilities of General Motors for unmatched innovation, proven performance, and breakthrough lifecycle economics. Learn more at www.gmdefensellc.com and watch out for new job posts as they expand and strengthen their team. You can also follow them on Twitter and LinkedIn. The GM Defense team is amazing, and we are proud that they sponsor the Leading Ladies of podcast. And back to today's guest. So we've talked about how how changing these perceptions actually can start with conversations in the home. But what about even before that? What about how do we ensure that we change perceptions so that girls actually think about careers in aviation or careers as a pilot? How do we go that far back and change those perceptions?
So if we have to begin by changing our own stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, girls and women still think, oh, it's going to be harder than it is for boys to get in aviation. That's a pile of crap. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. The skills are required for men and women are exactly the same. So it's that tipping point in a person's mind. Like, where do you go from saying, oh, it'd be really cool to be a pilot, to actually stepping out and saying, okay, damn it, I'm going to be a pilot. How do I do that? So I've, tried to go out into the world and lay out, okay, you first make the decision you want to be this, and then you're going to have to embrace that idea. And it's a full encompassing life change if you actually want to do this. So just giving concrete answers. Okay, here's your first step. Here's your second step. Here's the third. Here's where it's going to be really hard and too bad. You just need to do it. And making sure girls know that they can do this, and not just saying it, but then showing them how, getting that first flight and taking it beyond that concept and actually doing it. It's like, eating the elephant one bite at a time, because when you look at the scope of what you need to learn in aviation, it's daunting. but so is everything, right? And you can't just, jump into the thing. You're going to have to just walk quietly through that path and just, pick it up as you go along. And so as long as we're out there, we've got some women leaders out there. So we're seeing a lot more images of women in aviation, quietly leading and just being out there and getting a vision. I know for me growing up, I grew up in Minnesota, like we were saying. And when we talked about career day, they would actually take the boys in one room and the girls in the other room. And we would have completely separate conversations of what that looked like. So just think how much has changed. And I know we get frustrated, and I still get frustrated. I just looked up the numbers for airline transport pilot rated pilots, how many there are. And it's still only 4.5% of them are women. So,
wow.
but it takes time. It takes a generation or two. And so what we're doing now is going to affect the next generation. And I know my kids growing up they don't even think twice about seeing women in unusual roles, at least that I think are unusual. They just are like, what's the big deal, Mom? And I'm like, yes, that's exactly it. I don't want any more headlines saying, this is the first all-female flight crew of this airplane. As soon as we get through that, I think we'll have changed that image, and human beings will start to accept that, hey, we're human beings. We're all the same, whether we like it or not. And it takes time and generations, and we're just picking away at it, doing things like this today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to a lot of those headlines being normal, not first woman or first person of color or first this, first that. It's like, let's just make it the norm.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree too.
So in terms of changing perceptions, what are some of the perceptions that you had to change about yourself in order for you to break through some of the glass ceilings, either those that you created or those that others created?
Yeah. I had a lot of those aha moments along the way that had been around me the whole time. I just didn't acknowledge them. I know for me, when it's not necessarily just a personality type, but I've seen in general with my girl students, we always talk about ego, and we kind of put a bad connotation on it. But I found that women develop their confidence and ego a little bit later in life. It comes with knowledge, it comes with power. And I think for a lot of girls, especially in our society, we put so much image on what you look like and how you act and, blah, blah, blah. So you have to have this confidence and self-talk to get into a cockpit and say, okay, I'm going to take this thing by myself, put it up in the air. I'm going to fly to someplace I've never been to. You have to have that confidence and that ego. And I think we miss girls in that middle school, high school element when we want them to get into this career path. So, and I don't even have a good answer for that, but as a society, we need to work on that. I remember as I'm working on the 727, there's 3 pilots in the cockpit. And my change of perception on the situation is that I would walk in that cockpit with 2 guys that had never flown with a woman before. And I had the power because I'd spent my whole career flying with men. So I know how to behave and how to act, and they didn't. So as soon as I walked in the door, I'm like, haha, I got the power here because I'm used to this. And they're like, can I swear? Can I tell a joke? You could see that they were instantly uncomfortable. And so then I'm like, oh, I feel bad for you. I'm like, no, I don't. You guys are just going to have to get used to it. So I just learned to just, walk in that cockpit door, be happy to be there. I know how to do my job. I'm going to do it really well. I'm going to make you guys hold to that same standard. I want to be completely safe. And I learned, as a subordinate, like in the flight engineer seat, I would go to these different bases, and there was a different safety culture and different culture at every base. And there's a couple of bases I hated flying out of because it was a cowboy attitude. Nobody ran checklists. I mean, it was just this, complete safety hazard. And I just realized that just that communication, the human factors thing had such a big impact on safety. So I didn't care what they said. I would continue to follow the rules, follow the checklists, and to make sure that flight was safe and abiding by the rules, even if they didn't want to. And over time, they knew that was that I expected that of them, even though I was just the lowly flight engineer. So I could see them change their behavior just because I was so persistent on it. And so it was my little tiny victories like that changed my own perception of where I belonged in that crew of men. And it's a fascinating study of human interaction to be able to sit back, especially in the flight engineer seat. I used to get to watch the captain and the first officer communicate and work together. It was so intriguing to see what worked well, what personalities, what behaviors made other people do what they wanted them to do. So, I like to share that experience with my students, because flying is one thing, but actually that crew resource management inside the cockpit makes all the difference as far as a safe flight.
And what I'm hearing you say is that you took it upon yourself to own it. I own that I'm a great pilot. I own that I'm going to be excellent during this flight. And I own that by the end of this flight, you're not even going to be thinking about the fact that I'm a woman. And I own that I have different standards and I want to raise the standards, and that's okay. So to sum it up for our listeners, what I'm hearing is just own it. And if that's not something that's coming naturally from within, just practice it. Fake it till you make it, or act as if, is something that I like to say. And if you go in and you start owning it and you get a good response, then you're a little bit more confident next time to own something even bigger and better and keep on going.
Absolutely.
And the naysayers, I just say, haters don't hate on losers. So bye-bye if you want to be weird with me.
And to add on to that, so people ask, okay, well, how do I do that? How do I actually do that? How do I apply that? And so it could be stupid little things. What it was for me is that I would just have this ritual. And every time I would walk down the jet bridge and I was about to step on that airplane, I would just put my hand out on the edge of the fuselage and just touch it. And it would take me 1 second to say, okay, I have to leave everything that is human about me behind, because I'm stepping on this airplane and now I am the pilot.
Yeah.
So it was just a quick moment to shift my perception and my situational awareness and say, everything else is done. And I'm now the pilot. I am the captain. And this is the way it's going to be. So that's what you can do for yourself. Have your little ritual, whatever that is. Even if you put on your left shoe, to take a moment of higher situational awareness to say, okay, now I'm going to own this moment. I'm going to own this day. And this is how we're going to do it.
I love that. I'm a big fan of things like power poses, or before I go on stage, I'll do a little dance in the back just to get the blood flowing and just imagining that I'm a rock star. Even, one day I might be a rock star. I was about to say, even though I'm not a rock star, but hey, I might as well just act as if.
I think you're a rock star.
Oh, thank you. You are too. We're all rock stars here. Woohoo! So I'm just conscious of time. And like you said at the start, Erika, we could talk about this for 8 hours. But I know that Matt has a few questions for you.
Yeah, and hopefully they're not off topic. I do have a tendency to go on a tangent, and everybody's talking about it. And I saw in, your post from the top 62 when, I gave you the form and you filled it out. You mentioned that somebody you follow is Richard Branson, and he's been in the news a lot recently. So I was wondering if there's anything you had to share, or thoughts on him, maybe in specifically regards of what maybe lessons we can learn from him or this space flight in changing perceptions.
Yeah. So Richard Branson, there's two things that rise to the top when I think about him. Two things that I admire. First of all, he says he's going to do something and he does it. I watch him plow through the criticism. You have to have a thick skin to be in his position. And I just love that he just lets that all roll off of him. But you know what? The second thing that he has that's so powerful, which we don't spend a lot of time talking about, is a sense of humor. He has this fabulous sense of humor, and what that can do for you is any situation. It's like in the cockpit when a misogynist is there and just doesn't want you there. If you can filter that with a sense of humor, and pull out, look at the situation and say, okay, look how stupid this situation is, right? If you can put an angle of humor on it, you can get through anything. So I think Richard Branson is one of those people that has just this joy of life, and he just he, like we were saying, he owns it. Even when he makes these horrible mistakes, he is willing to laugh at it, laugh at himself, laugh at the naysayers, and he just does it. And I love that he's kind of stepped down different avenues, and sometimes it's a dead end, but he's willing to step it back and try again. And just those, little personality quirks that he has gotten him to where he is now.
Yeah. In my experience, I notice that sometimes women will let the criticism affect them a bit more than it does men. And so I think, looking to men that have broken barriers, because he has broken barriers, what is it that they're doing, and not letting that criticism sink really deep into our heart is really important.
And it's hard to do. It is, because boy, there are some people out there that are their sole goal is to tear you down. I've definitely ran in with them. I've been with guys in the simulator. Just to give you an example, I just remember I was flying with this guy. We're doing V1 cuts. We're doing in the simulator, but they pull the engines on us, so you have to quickly step on the rudders. And that was my favorite thing. I loved doing it. Loved doing engine failures. And all of a sudden, this one day, I'm like, wow, what the heck is going on? The sim is acting really funky. I'm stepping on the rudder. I'm pushing as hard as I can. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? Out of the corner of my eye, I can see a little bit of movement. And the guy I'm flying with is purposely stepping on the wrong rudder. So engine failure, you have to have an immediate response, so you can make sure you're in control of this. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to watch this. So I'm watching, and sure enough, he's doing this. So, I'm like, okay, this is my career on the line. I need to pass check rides. I need to do a perfect job. What can I do about this? So I just, I pulled the instructor aside and said, hey, look, this, I just want to share with you, this is going on. I'm not going to get this guy in trouble. I said, I just want you to just watch, and just, so sure enough, we do it again. And the instructor's watching, and he's like, he sees it happening. He stopped the sim, and a very long string of swear words came out, but he's like, what are you doing? So it gave him a good lecture on, this is your crew. This is people that you have to fly with. This is your life in your hands, the person sitting next to you. And, so it exists out there. Every situation you'll have to handle it, whatever is required of that. And so I can't give a blanket answer how to get through that, but if you can keep a positive perspective on it and saying, okay, so here's a bad situation. What can I do to make this person learn from it too, so that it doesn't ever happen again? You'll find a way.
Yeah, there are naysayers out there. And what I have to remind myself is that's about them. It's not about me. It's their insecurity. And even in this work that I'm doing, I do have critics. And sometimes for a moment or two, it does like pierce me. I'm like, what am I doing? And then I have to remind myself, well, what's my bigger goal here? I want to make a difference. I'm not going to always get it right. Everyone's not always going to be happy with me. And that's okay.
Yeah. And if you quit, that lets them win.
Yeah.
So just keep that in the back of your head.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Well, final question today, Erika. What would be the one piece of advice you would give to a young woman thinking about going into a career in aviation?
Well, you probably won't like this, but my advice is to don't take advice. You going through aviation, you will be bombarded with advice. Everybody around you is going to tell you the way it should be, or how it should go, what you should do next. I try to teach my students, because most of them think they want to be an airline pilot, but there are all these other niches in aviation that need to be filled. So just because you think you want to be an airline pilot, don't be resistant to other segments like business aviation. I mean, how cool it would be to fly a Gulfstream around the world for some corporation.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, so there's a lot of things that you will get to find in your head and what you think you want. So my only advice is to not take that external advice and listen to your heart. And your truth and what's going to make you happy is inside of you. And we don't listen to that very often. So listen to what you want next, on how you think you can do it. And there's a ton of resources out there, so please reach out. My email is out there. If you have any question whatsoever, please let me know. I've been in many different segments of aviation, so reach out. When you hit those barriers, don't stop. Just look around, say, hey, who can answer a question so that I can get over or around this barrier? That's key right now to get through a career in aviation. Is there'll be tons of barriers. We have about an 80% washout rate. So instead of just stopping, look both ways, try to find someone else who can help you over that barrier.
Well, Erika, thank you so much for giving us your time so generously today. I could talk to you for hours. I know that our listeners are just going to love this podcast. So if you are listening, head over to MackayUnlimited.com for the podcast. And you'll also see some links to Erika's books and Erika's websites and how you can get in touch with Erika. And, just keep, every time you're thinking to yourself, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. Just ask yourself, what would Erika do?
Thank you so much. And thank you guys so much for doing podcasts like this. And Matt, thank you for doing what you're doing on LinkedIn. It's so important. Truly more than you realize the impact that's happening out there. Just having those images come through people's screens are so important. And it's so nice to have positive messages these days because it's a tough world out there. So thank you for doing podcasts like this. Absolutely.
Thank you for being a part of this. And thank you for joining us. Like I said, it's an honor and a pleasure and a privilege.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Have an awesome day.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening, everyone. We hope you now have additional tools and insights for creating your own cracks in the glass ceiling. If you think this will inspire and help others, please share this episode on your social media and leave your comments on MackayUnlimited.com/podcasts. For more tips and support as you embrace your journey through the glass ceiling, please join our community Facebook group at leadingladiesofFB.com.